I think everybody knows where they were during a major earthquake. In 1989, the San Francisco earthquake was probably one that most people who are alive today, you know, would remember at least where they were. And it was pretty awesome. It was the World Series, of course, was one of the games in the World Series. And I had just left the office. I was on my way home in LA when I'm listening to the radio, and sure enough, that's the earthquake hit. So I rushed back to the office, called the desk, and started doing a few things, and then figured, oh, I'm going to have to be there. So I called the desk again, and I said, "What's the plan?" And I was the number two person on the staff at the time in Los Angeles, and Bob Fuss was the bureau chief. So I started making arrangements for me to go. And then they called me back and said, "Well, Bob's going." And I said, "Well, shouldn't I go too?" And they said, "Well, he's the bureau chief." And I said, "This is big enough that you should have two of us." And he said, "Well, I'll call you back." And David Oziel, who was the editor at the time, made the decision. He said, "Look, I'm going to send both of you. Okay, so make arrangements to both of you. I think probably is big enough for two people." So I had made arrangements to fly into Fresno, and because there was no way you could fly into the Bay Area. So I made arrangements to fly into Fresno, and I made arrangements for two at that point. I made one for me and one for Bob. We both took separate flights to get into Fresno. Then I arranged for a car, and he got there first, and he got the car. There weren't many cars left, obviously, because so many people had the same idea that I did. And LA Times guys and everybody were flying into Fresno to do this. And then, of course, limited. Fresno's a small town as far as LA or San Francisco are concerned. It's a big city, but limited number of cars were available, especially on that evening. So we got there, and Bob got the first car. He found out later, until like a week later, that he was driving around on a donut. One of the wheels was a donut. They'd had a flat tire and hadn't had time to change it. Car came in, it was dirty, and he just, "I'll take it no matter what." And what happened with me is I got pretty upset when I got there. I said, "Look, you got to have a car." I made arrangements for another car. And so did another reporter for another newspaper. So we decided that we would go together, and we would go to one of the cities outside, within a couple hour drive from there. And Gilroy is where we went to, and where the Garlic Festival is. And then I would make he would keep the car, and I would try to get a car in Gilroy. So that's what happened. We took it up there, and he let me off, and he took the car, and I was on my own to try to get a rental car, and I got one. So that was the good side. So Bob and I were staying in touch as best we could because, again, we didn't have cell phones. This is 1989. So I was covering the inside valleys, and he was covering the city of San Francisco. So we were supposed to kind of work it out where if we did meet, we'd meet like in Oakland, and we'd swap off, and he would go back because he had other things that he had to cover that he had made arrangements for. And then that would leave me the rest of the week to cover when the World Series started, hopefully. So we're doing this whole thing, and it was wild. It really was wild. And we had so much audio, and it was a big earthquake. And then the president decided to fly in. Well, we already had John Todges there, who is the sports editor for the radio network, and he was there for the World Series. Bob Fuss had gone up to cover as a correspondent. I had gone up to cover as a correspondent, and Bill Small was the White House correspondent. So he was coming in with the president. So we had 4 national correspondents covering the same story. We had it covered from every angle that could possibly be covered. And one of the highlights for me, I covered the Oakland side until Bob went back from San Francisco, and then I jumped across the bridge, what bridge there was, and most of the bridges were damaged, and including the 2 highways, the one which had collapsed on top of the other. It was a double-decker, and it collapsed like this and smashed all the cars in between. And it took them for ages to rectify that And of course, there were a lot of people dead. But Billy Graham came in, and Billy Graham was going to walk through the area. And Billy Graham, whether you believe what he believes or not, it doesn't really matter. He's an ambassador, and a well-known and much loved ambassador, even by people who aren't Christians, and they understand who he was. And we had a pool, and a pool, for those of you who don't know, is a one of each media: one radio, one TV, one newspaper, one magazine, and one reporter for each would go on this pool. And he wanted to take a tour of the collapsed freeways in Oakland. And so that's what we did. And I was selected to go in the radio pool. And the thing about that is you can't file anything until you get back, and then you have to share it with everybody else first, and then you can file, and everybody gets to file at the same time. It's a good system. So anyway, we're walking along, and he's trying real hard, and we're just walking along with tape recorders rolling. He's trying real hard not to say what a lot of people want him to say, who are believers of the Christian religion and who are kind of hardcore. And that was, he was asked about if this was God's revenge on the San Francisco area because of the homosexuality. He didn't go there. And matter of fact, he kind of passed it off and wouldn't say, yeah, this is God's revenge. And he said, this is a tragedy, and people are dead, people are dying. And he went on to talk about that for just a very brief moment. But as a Christian myself, it was just a great moment when he said that, because he wasn't taking sides. He wasn't blaming this on something that most Christians at that time would believe was sin. And so we walked through with Billy Graham, and it was my only time I'd ever met him. And then we walked out and we filed our stories and everything. But that was just really, really a touching moment and a powerful moment too. So my job at that point was to continue to cover the recovery until the World Series started. And then I would be there for the World Series game, watch the game, and then file some stuff before and then file some stuff afterwards. And of course, John Todges was there to do the sports stuff. But my main thing was that moment when we're restarting life again. The World Series is resuming. And that was the thing that was my thing to do. I did that. I did it. One of my better radio voicers that I think I've done. I had a lot of time to think about it and put it together, and crowd noise and everything, and the hoopla. And it was really cool. It was a great moment to see the city and the world kind of come back from this disaster, much like COVID. Much like COVID, coming back from a disaster and then getting back into hopefully normal life to some aspect, although normal life in the Bay Area would not be fully back for many, many years. And it was just one of those things that, just a huge story that captivated the world, and it included the sports world because of the timing of the earthquake. And then I flew home the next day and went back to my regular work. And that's a story on the 1989 earthquake. I hope you enjoyed it. And we'll have another story for you next time.